If you're ever a Doctor Who fan who's taken a passing glance at the internet, then you've probably heard that Amy's Choice is underrated, and I would agree with this. At time of recording, Amy's Choice remains one of my favourite episodes of the revival. I agree with a lot of what's praised about this episode, the concepts, the character work, the performances, the villain. But I feel what truly makes it special isn't always talked about quite enough in the circles I run in. And to be fair, it's something that's only hit me recently. I've done what I usually do, go away and read the works of much smarter people than me. Now I've got something I think I really want to talk to you guys about. I want to do it so much that I'm going to do it right now. Oh, don't worry. This isn't going to be a recurring gimmick throughout the whole video, in some misguided effort to try and make it more interesting. I assure you, there will be no more bird songs throughout the rest of the duration. I killed all the birds in England. Seriously, all of them are gone.
Dreams are a funny thing. We all have them, even if we don't consciously remember a dream happening. The dream landscape is the perfect foil for so many stories, giving rise to iconic films like Inception and...
Well, that's an introductory paragraph sorted. Cheers, Harbo! I feel like it's inevitable in any TV show that goes on for a while that you'll eventually do a dream-based plot. You'd think the ones that work best are the ones that really take advantage of the concept and use it as a blank check to be weird. An example I could bring up if I'd seen it is Buffy's Restless. What's interesting about Amy's Choice is that both dreams, spoilers, is how normal they feel. They're presented to us no differently than any other episode of the series. The sequences in the village, in particular, have a quite subdued colour palette. Like, just compare this to the lovely green and blues that we got in the opening sections of the 11th Hour. That really lent Amy's house a real fairy tale, magical feel. This looks as down-to-earth as it can possibly feel, and the TARDIS is mostly shot how you would expect it. Now, you'd think that'd be the point. The characters are trying to work out which is the dream and which isn't. So it makes sense that they look as close to reality, but that isn't what the episode spends most of its time trying to do. The characters talk about it, but they don't really make any progress, as one review I found criticised it for. Though we know this is a pointless task because we know eventually that both worlds end up being fake. But let's forget all that for a second. Just look at these and try and tell me one thing. How would you tell which of these is real or not? Try to distinguish them from real life. Yeah, when the differences become obvious. But then try and distinguish them from average Doctor Who plots. One bit of dialogue that really leapt out to me when I rewatched it recently was this.
Okay, well, we're in a spaceship that's bigger on the inside than the outside.
With a bow tie wearing alien.
So maybe what rings true isn't so simple.
This just sums up the problem of even trying to do this kind of premise in Doctor Who at all. This is the show that should consider itself being unable to be separated from dreams as a badge of honour. Like, take the monsters. Usually, if someone has a bit of criticism towards this episode, it's probably directed at them, and I get why. But what struck me about them, ageism aside, is that they're not just a crap Doctor Who monster. They're an intentionally crap Doctor Who monster.
What's this? Attack of the Old People? Oh, that's ridiculous.
They're literally bug-eyed, they've got a generic name and a motive that sounds like it should make sense, but if you stop and think about it for a second, it doesn't at all. And they kill you with morning breath. Or take the plot on the TARDIS. A collision caused with a cold sun. Notice how that's basically 42, but somehow even sillier. And, well, cold now. They're parodies of Doctor Who plots. The story becomes a really fun game as you try to work out what things can the show throw at me that I won't buy? What can't this show get away with? It's all about the difference between logic and Doctor Who logic.
Science is all wrong here. Burning ice.
No. Ice can burn. Sofas can read. It's a big universe.
Being written by a comedy writer and very likely receiving notes from one is already pretty funny enough, but it just takes on a whole level once this angle clicked with me. The Doctor doing dramatic stare-offs with the villain like he usually does, but it's this sweet-looking old lady. I am the Doctor blaring while the Doctor's just trying to get into a cupboard and go to sleep. And the fact that they're running from the slowest monsters ever, but Amy's pregnant, so they still can't outrun them. Oh, this is great. But this isn't a sweeping deconstruction. The show isn't announcing that it's become too silly or anything stupid like that. No, these monsters and plots, they're lovingly authentic. I've already mentioned the comparisons to 42, but the old people monsters, look at their motive again. The Doctor was encountering something with this exact same agenda just last week with the vampires. These plots could exist in stories where we take the absolute lunacy that comes with Doctor Who for granted. It's just tweaked just enough to be sillier, and the silliness does not hurt the darker moments of the story or hurt the threat that Toby Jones poses as the Dream Lord. This script doesn't want to laugh at the arc in space, it wants to give it a kiss and laugh at it. You can do both at the same time. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a love letter to bubble wrap. Oh, he's only gonna done it. He's only gonna name drop the first part of the title and the thumbnail. So right now, you may be rightly thinking to yourself, okay, Amy's choice is self-aware. So fucking what? Doctor Who has been self-aware since at least its second ever series. TV shows being able to mock themselves yet also take themselves seriously is hardly a revelation, and meta-commentary at this point should go a little bit beyond Doctor Who is kinda silly if you really think about it sometimes. Alright, so what does Amy choose at the end? Rory, but she also chooses life on the TARDIS, not life in a domestic setting raising a kid. I've become a bit suspicious about takes on Amy's arc being about growing up, because why should she have to?
We have to grow up eventually.
Says who?
Does being childish and being mature always have to be mutually exclusive? And if her arc was about something as simple as just choosing Rory over the Doctor, why were both dreams false? Why not have the climax just be her choosing Rory? One of my favourite TARDIS Auditorium posts is the one on Amy's choice. Most of my audience have probably already read it, but for anyone who hasn't, I'm going to try and sum it up here and try not to fuck it up. Wish me luck. The problem as I understand it is that long-running franchises have a tendency to view marriage as an obstacle to interesting stories. This is apparently quite a documented problem in the comic industry. Vera over at Council of Geeks has laid out a video a while back of the tendency of comic book writers to never let couples stay happy. One of the more infamous examples being when Peter Parker used Satan as a divorce attorney. It could be fair to say Doctor Who's been guilty of this problem as well. Just look all the way back to how the Doctor abandoned Susan with the first man she so much as looked at. Part of a character growing up seems to mean that they stop having adventures. Did I say characters? I meant female characters. And did I say growing up? I meant had sex.
And of course, this is at the heart of why marriage and childhood adventure are instinctively opposed. A married person is sexually active, and thus no longer allowed to have childish adventures. Hence the decision to have the Ledworth dream include Amy's pregnancy, a detail that is significant only because it makes the choice, unambiguously, between Amelia Pond, the girl who waited and who now has fairy tale adventures, and Amy Pond, the woman who has had sex.
Arguably, even the Davies era had this view as well. For all that it talked up the merits of an ordinary life, that was still an obstacle to the time-space adventures. Rose had to choose travelling with the Doctor over her family, and her, Martha, and arguably Donna all ended up at the end of the Davies era, all settled down with husbands. When they'd grown up, aka had partners, aka fucked, they'd stopped being able to have fairy tale adventures. And for most of the episode, that's what it looks like it's heading towards with Amy.
But this is Stephen Moffat, who wrote his first Doctor Who story as a rousing defence of sexual freedom. The idea that he was ever going to declare to any extent that being sexually active meant you were no longer worthy of adventures, thereby pulling some good old-fashioned problem with Susan bullshit, was always ridiculous. That's just not the way that Moffat works, and that is absolutely a part of what's going on in Amy's choice.
Jack Graham points out that each character has their own interpretation of the dreams. This is revealed by how they describe certain things in their dialogue, which in turn says a lot about them and their interiority as characters. Rory seems dead set at the start that the Ledworth dream is the real one.
It's just so tranquil and relaxed. Nothing bad could ever happen here.
However, he goes off it over time. Now this is partly because of the old people aliens, but it does also indicate that maybe Rory's more on board with time travel than he thought. As long as Amy's there, of course. Amy keeps changing her mind on which world feels more real.
Okay, no, this is real. I'm definitely awake.
It is real. I know it's real.
Okay, this is a real one. Definitely this one. It's all solid. This is definitely real. It's definitely this one. I keep saying that, don't I? I feel it both places.
The only point at which Amy becomes certain is when she loses Rory.
This is the dream. Definitely this one. If we die here, we wake up, yeah? This is the dream.
How do you know?
Because if this is real life, I don't want it. I don't want it.
Domesticity or life in the TARDIS doesn't matter. She insists that he is there with her. And finally, the Doctor reveals that the choice was false all along. Amy doesn't have to choose between Rory and adventures with him. And it's great for a number of reasons. It's a nice diversion from how things were handled with Mickey, a clear step in a different direction. It's Doctor Who showing other franchises how to do this. It's a lovely trait of a lot of Moffat's work going forward. He shows that the Doctor's capable of making a relationship work. And for a hot minute, Sherlock was made more interesting by the inclusion of Mary, but then,
Surprise.
yeah, cheers for that. So when I read this, I wondered how this applied to the parody aspect I noticed. Okay, I thought at first this mapped nicely onto the need for Doctor Who to be both dark and silly. We don't need to choose between serious or camp any more than we have to choose between real life and the fantastic, people or stories. We can do both. But for my money, it's going a bit further than that. It's saying we should be doing both. The fact that this episode's focus is on the character drama rather than either of the sci-fi plots tells you a great deal. Ledworth Before the Monsters kind of feels like a parody of the boring show about domesticity and relationships and crying that some classic Who fans claimed the RTD era was. But for all the Doctor yells about the village being dull, can you imagine that either of these plots on their own would have made for compelling episodes? The fact that they're interchangeable, not just from each other, but loads of other random Villain of the Week stories, says quite a bit. This is the Moffat era refuting the idea that Russell got it wrong with his focus on characters, or that he's suddenly going to diverge from one of the revival's greatest strengths. Ideas and sci-fi concepts on their own don't make for a good story. They need characters, they need drama, and it goes the other way around. To anyone who dismissed Doctor Who as that show about bug-eyed monsters, this story tells a compelling drama about a young, scared woman trying to decide how she's going to live the rest of her life. And the silly aliens and the magic science don't detract from that. In fact, they enhance it. They are used to tell this story. While the success of Doctor Who leading up to this should be evidence alone of this fact, it's a lesson worth remembering. And in the coming series, Doctor Who is going to have more and more outlandish plots. So it's worth reminding ourselves how detached from reality Doctor Who has the potential to be. That negative review of this episode I mentioned earlier said this.
I said, when reviewing the dreadful Buffy movie, that any interest I had in proceedings was destroyed by the characters' failure to take their own situation seriously. But Amy's choice turns out to suffer from an even more foundational defect. It's not just the characters don't believe in their world, it's that they shouldn't believe in it. Heck, even the writers don't.
And honestly, this is all down to taste. This wasn't a bad review. It explained very clearly how it reached the conclusions that it did. If you ever love a story, do seek out negative reviews of it because it really helps you identify what you loved about it. This just leaves us with a certain question. Do stories depend upon believability? Is that the only way of engaging with a story? Because no one really believed that the Doctor would die at the end of all those classic series cliffhangers. Just something to bear in mind. No matter what your feelings are on what came later, this is a solid step in this particular direction. I also want to quickly touch on the Dream Lord. Yeah, he's one of the best one-off villains of New Who.
Anything could happen.
No.
I adore antagonists that kind of aren't there physically, they kind of act as a hallucination. Only the protagonists can see them, the rest of the plot ignores them, but they just apparate in and out of nowhere. They just start taunting. I've seen some people suggest that he's another take on the Valeyard, a dark reflection of the Doctor existing between the 12th and final regeneration. But you see, you were wrong. He is in fact an update of a different Time Lord from the 80s. One far more powerful. Merlin. Okay, let me explain. You guys have probably all seen Battlefield, but I love to talk, so I'm going to explain it anyway. A bunch of real Arthurian knights, they call the 7th Doctor Merlin. Now, at first he doesn't know what they're talking about, but then he theorizes that this is because of something he hasn't done yet. And we meet the Merlin Doctor in some of the VNAs, although I haven't read them myself, so I'm mostly going off word of mouth here, and by word of mouth I mean the wiki. The significance of Merlin was that the Master Manipulator 7th Doctor could be manipulated by one other person, his future self. It's fair to say that Matt Smith was something of a return to the trickster Doctor that we saw in late Seven's run and the Virgin New Adventures. A lot of his stories have elements reminiscent of those Wilderness Years stories, which makes sense. That's where Stephen Moffat and Paul Cornell first started writing. Elements reminiscent of love and war and continuity errors would show up in stories like A Christmas Carol and The Girl Who Waited. So naturally, Moffat and Nye dust off this old trick, take it to its fullest possible potential, and have a little twist to it. A story where the Doctor and villain are actually working together, and a story where the Doctor has to figure out his own unconscious plan, is an inspired premise. It's why that final shot of the Dream Lord staring back at the Doctor through his reflection really lands, because it's not gloating. It's not trying to torment the Doctor. It's conspiratorial. It's the villain looking at our hero and saying, "We've done a good job together, haven't we? Look at Amy and Rory. Look how happy they are. This is the feeling I'm hoping to create in my viewers." That's why whenever I do a worst episode ever review, I turn to look at them from the TV. I look them in the eye and say, yeah, I might be making these, but you're watching them.
You're just as much to blame here.
And it's really telling where this series is going with this particular version of the character. The villain of any True 11 story is often himself. Marianne Johannesson at Flick Philosopher talks about the self-loathing depicted by the Doctor in this episode in great detail, as well as a whole bunch of other details that I completely missed.
I think this episode is a little bit about, well, responding to fans who don't want to think about the Doctor as a man, who aren't enjoying, for instance, the innuendo that isn't even innuendo about the Doctor having a sex life. "Don't be jealous," the Dream Lord tells Amy. "He's been around, our boy." And the Doctor hints at the same thing, that he's a man with physical desires and needs of all sorts. The Dream Lord, the Doctor says before he has caught on to the Dream Lord may be motivated to do what he's doing because he's got no physical form. That gets you down after a while, so he's taking it out on folk like us who can touch and eat and feel. Isn't it more interesting if he's a man and not a monk? And wouldn't a man with a physical form, that is, the Doctor, get a bit down after a while if he wasn't able to enjoy all the perks that come with being corporeal?
So not only do we see that this maps onto a sex life not being the antithesis to fairy tale adventures, as we've seen with Amy, Jack Graham also suggested that the Dream Lord is more reminiscent of the Doctor from the old show, the version of the character that didn't have to contend with issues like this. The Doctor even basically says at the end, this is the version of him that exists without his friends. Maybe the Dream Lord is punishing the Doctor for his dismissive view of domestic life, or his view on Rory. The Doctor's made little jabs about Rory's appearance before, and it's in this episode it gets shoved back in his face how cruel he's kind of being. This even works as an allegory for the people who don't want Doctor Who to be political. If you take the human factor and the allegory out of Amy's choice, you're just left with the interchangeable plots and the character that can't make a physical difference and isn't quite there. Whatever way you cut it, is the same conclusion. Bubble wrap is wonderful, but it's only good when it's containing something. Otherwise, it's just bubble wrap. I could have written something better, but I'm not going to. I'm going to make this stupid fucking title work. If I had to sum up Amy's choice in a single moment, it would be the moment where it has the same climax as the dark ending of Turn Left, where the main characters kill themselves because the world they're in is so horrible. It's that, paired alongside evil old people, bug-eyed monster, alien monsters, with bad morning breath, attacking a house. It's not my favourite story ever, but if I had to pick the tone for my ideal Doctor Who, I'm pointing in this episode's direction. It's not enough to take your bubble wrap seriously and laugh at it at the same time. Bubble wrap can be used for better franchise storytelling and sex-positive feminism. Use it wisely and be proud of it.
Any questions?
Oh my god. Right. I'm going away on holiday for the next 2 weeks, so there's not going to be a video for a little while. In the meantime, if you could share this around as much as you can, I'm very proud of this one and would love it to get as much attention as possible. Like, toss a comment into the vacuum, subscribe, trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. All of that would be so much appreciated. Right, I'm going to sleep. Ironically, doing a video about a story about dreaming has made me fucking lose a night of sleep.